Creatives for Climate is a global network on a mission to drive action and awareness of our climate and ecological emergency. We're an ecosystem of brains that has the power to change the world. We're looking for more creative and beautiful minds, willing to learn, imagine a better future, and act on the climate crisis. We're a living network of interconnected and communicating roots, working in symbiosis. And we want our numbers to mushroom. More brains always make things better. So whether you're a scientist, designer, activist, performer, developer, farmer, strategist, filmmaker, brand specialist, writer, investor, engineer, policy advisor, or simply a passionate human, we want you to join us. Because creative thinking is going to save the planet we call home.
Amazing. So a big welcome to everyone joining today to our first public webinar of 2025. So Mission 2030, a roadmap for creative climate action. And tonight we're going to hear from some voices across the industry and the movement, including some of the Creators for Climate team. But before we kick off, as I know some of you have already started, but please introduce yourself in the chat, where you're calling in from, potentially what your role in the creative industries is. And we'd also love to know, maybe how long you've been a Creators for Climate member, or if you're new to the space. And if you do have any questions throughout, we will be monitoring the chat. So just pop them in and we'll answer them as best we can. And as there is a panel later, there is also going to be space for potential questions to the audience. So if you do have them as we're going along, let us know so we can potentially put them forward to our guest speakers. So for those who don't know me, my name is Tennille, or I also go by T, and I have she, her pronouns, and I am the lead campaigner at Creators for Climate. So I have this wonderful job of kicking us off today. And as you all introduce yourself, I'm going to take us through what we're going through today in the agenda. So we're going to be talking about some pretty exciting roadmap forward, even though it might feel a bit weird to talk about that in a time where things might seem quite dire. But before we look ahead, we really want to look back and take a moment to kind of see where we've come from, not only Creators for Climate, but the industry and the movement. So then we can look forward at the pathways for you to take ownership of, as well as hear insights and stories about how we can make a vision of 2030 hopeful, regenerative, and community powered. So why are we here? Well, 2024 marked the first year where we surpassed the 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And as the UN Secretary General reminded us, that this is really a signal to push even harder for systemic change. He quoted, "Reaching this limit isn't that we are kind of getting rid of these long-term goals of keeping the rise of global temperatures to 1.5 degrees, but it means we really need to fight harder to get back on track." And it's no secret that this year alone has brought its unique challenges, whether it be the geopolitical tensions that we're seeing, the economic instability, AI, this list kind of just seems to go on. But the climate crisis isn't a trend, and no one here or across the world can escape the consequences of a warming planet. And we know that turning the tide on these deep-seated interests beholden to big polluters is not going to be an easy task. But the momentum of this collective movement is growing daily. And although it might feel like this kind of David versus Goliath battle, remember in the end that David does actually win. So the creative industries does hold an incredible power to be part of that movement, as we know that creativity can not only shape culture, but behavior and beliefs as well. And if we look at the projections of advertising itself in 2025, there's some pretty hefty numbers we've got here. So on an average day, anyone in this space would be seeing around 6,000 advertisements per day, which is massive. And it's more along 6,000 to 10,000, depending on where you live. And the global ad spend is projected to reach 1.1 trillion US dollars, which is insane. And if we're looking at social media, the total ad spend for digital ads is now 40% across social media. So if we really want to truly shift the role of this creative industry in the climate crisis, we really need to we needed more than just a network, but a way for creatives, for partners, for agencies and all levels to kind of step into agency and action, because the creative industries isn't just the engine for commercial innovation, which we have seen, but a vital force for accelerating human development. So we can remain unwavering in our belief that creativity isn't just a tool, but a core catalyst, as creativity can create agency. It can problem solve, it can restore and inspire, it can challenge, and it can accelerate that human development. And to kind of understand this roadmap forward as we push for collective change in 2030, it's going to be important for us to look back, to learn, and to also feel gratitude for those who have kind of come into this space before us, so we can actually shape what comes next. And we're all united in this space for our love of creativity. So I would love to introduce you to our first speaker of the evening, Robbie Gillett, who is the co-director at Ad Free Cities. Robbie, you should have co-host access, so you should be able to come off mute. And also, if you'd like to take over sharing, so you can join us.
Great, thanks very much, Danielle. Do you suggest I take over, so I share my screen so I can?
Yeah, if you'd like, or I can do it for you, whichever you prefer.
Let's see if I can do it real quick, but if I can get onto that, bear with me. And now multiple presenters to share. Here we go. Great, and then I'll go full screen on that. And hopefully, all being well, that has worked. Doesn't look like it quite has from what I can see. I'm quite gone full screen there, but someone interrupt me if it's a problem. But hi everyone, my name is Robbie Gillett. As Tanel said, I'm a co-director at Ad Free Cities and also the advertising campaign. Ad Free Cities is a UK network of groups in cities looking to stop the spread of outdoor advertising, who are concerned about the harms caused by an excess dominance of outdoor advertising. And the advertising campaign is a partner project specifically looking at getting tobacco style restrictions on advertising for high carbon products, for environmentally damaging products. I wanted to join today to give a very kind of potted history, a brief history of campaigns that have come before this historic moment we're in now, as we saw there, the UN Secretary General calling for a global ad ban on fossil fuel company ads. And we can look back to campaigns inside and outside of the ad industry for inspiration. So I'm just going to give a quick history of some movements that have come and gone or are still active, and some of the wins that they've notched up along the way. So very prominently, campaigns against sexist advertising or advertising rather, was a major component of the women's movement in the 70s and 60s and 70s onwards. Advertising was recognized as a site where gender relations and unhealthy body images were culturally reproduced on a day-to-day level, and a key intersection that needed tackling. And I've got here one example of a sex ad and some subvertising on a car advert, and it said if it were a lady, this car would get its bottom pinched, and if the writing there says if it were a lady, this car would run you down in response. And this continues on to be through the 70s and the 80s, and I've got some examples here from the French network Resistance à l'agression publicitaire, who are still active today in countering sexist ads. Now, in the UK, from around 2016 onwards, the UK advertising regulator brought in new advertising codes to prohibit gender stereotyping in adverts in the UK context, that is. But the problem has not completely gone away, of course, and different countries have different experiences. And so these examples on the right are very from the last couple of years from some of the organising in France there. So huge shout to the women's movement for that work over the many decades. Elsewhere, we've also seen inspiring campaigns against tobacco advertising. So this is a group called Bugger Up, which, from Australia, who throughout the 1980s would go out with step ladders and spray cans and deface various tobacco advertising. Bugger Up stood for Billboard Utilizing Graffitiists Against Unhealthy Promotions. And tobacco advertising in many countries is now banned, in the UK since 2003. And it does feel absurd that it was ever allowed to go on for so long. But what Bugger Up used to do with healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, is in acts of sort of public civil disobedience, go out and deface these adverts as a way of drawing attention to it, to the absurdity of it. Fast forward into the 90s and some of the alter-globalization movement that was gathering pace in that decade throughout the 90s and the 2000s, and advertising was seen as part of a package of corporate power that was having negative influence on the world. So groups such as Adbusters also picked up on this kind of tobacco advertising and did their own humorous spoofs in this thing that would become known as subvertising, subverting advertising. Key text there might be Culture Jam by Carl Lasner or Naomi Klein's No Logo in the year 2000, as well as the Adbusters magazine as well. I'll come back to that slide in a moment. But yeah, throughout the 90s and 2000s, lots of people, it was sort of part of the activist toolkit, and in many respects it still is today, to go out and humorously adjust adverts, sometimes to make a very serious point about public health or gender oppression or climate change and environmental degradation, or sometimes just for having a laugh. So this is the Billboard Liberation Front, who took on many serious issues, but they also would adjust this one to say LSD, the beginning of something wonderful. And I suppose I wanted to give a nod to the more whimsical element of advertising, because in some respects it's as old as advertising itself. People humorously, like the tradition of pranksterism, people humorously changing adverts, does have a long and proud history. I just wanted to make some space for it. But yeah, elsewhere, sorry for skipping around here. Ad-free cities began in 2020, opposing new billboards in British cities. But actually groups such as Résistance à l'agression publicitaire in France were founded as far back as 1992, and they now have around 25 local groups. And they're really, I suppose I wanted to give a nod to them. They really embedded themselves or came from the radical ecology movement in France, and having formed so long ago and been a big part of people's political education in France, they're now, many of their activists have gone on to take up positions in local government, and are, that's now part of their identity, part of their politics. So I suppose I wanted to include it as a thing of like, social change takes a long time. It takes a frustratingly long time, but seeing the long road ahead and resourcing ourselves for that as best in the many ways we need to, will help us get there and not burn out, and hopefully sustain us. So yeah, that is a potted history. There's another out of place slide here about some of the alter-globalization movement and some of that subvertising and critique of corporate advertising that was really at its height in sort of late 90s and early noughties. But to finish up with, fast forward to 2019, and we've had lots of campaigns outside the advertising industry, but inside the ad industry, we've also seen responses to these different social movements. And this one from Extinction Rebellion urging the ad industry to use its power for good in 2019 has definitely kicked off a really important conversation about climate and advertising and what we can do about it. So with that, I'll pass back to you, Tennille.
Amazing. Thank you, Robbie. And I think, you know, there's so many different ways that people engage with different movements over the history of time and how people have been involved with different movements. So I think one thing we would love to know, as this is a movement in itself, is what actually motivated folks to join today. Whether you're new to this space or whether you've been involved with it since the 80s or 60s or before, yeah, pop in the chat maybe what motivated you to join, or whether there's a particular movement that has motivated you to be a part of something, because we'd love to know. And as you're popping that in the chat, we've got some local Extinction Rebellion folks. I was also motivated by Extinction Rebellion. I think my first protest was ever with Extinction Rebellion. So it's nice to see some fellow folks from XR here. I am going to pass over to Lucy, our CEO and founder of Creatives for Climate.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Tennille, and Robbie. Thank you so much for that really inspiring reflection on the history of subvertising and activism in advertising. It's really exciting to be here today, and almost 100 people tuned in. So let me get started by talking about when this particular initiative and movement started, which was 2019. Looking back, I don't know if you were also inspired by Fridays for Future, but in 2019, kind of getting out into the streets and mobilizing felt really palpable. And that was my kind of entry point into being a bit disillusioned with business as usual and sustainability CSR initiatives and wanting to do something a bit more direct. So during this time, as Robbie mentioned, Extinction Rebellion published this letter, and it's a brilliant piece of copy. It's quite obviously written by an industry insider, so I encourage you to seek it out. And it basically said two things that really inspired me. So one of them is calling out this industry as a problem. So advertising has helped promote high carbon lifestyles and also hyperconsumption. If we are to survive, this must change rapidly. So basically, you're the problem. But then they continued, as mediators between the public and brands, the advertising industry is uniquely capable of driving rapid behavior change across society around the world and should take the lead rather than be driven. So this felt like a really exciting opportunity and also recognition of the power of persuasion and influence. And so inspired by this movement and others responding to this movement, we partnered with Extinction Rebellion in the Netherlands to host the first, you can see it here, Creatives for Climate Summit. So it was hosted at Patagonia. It was a sold-out event. And quite honestly, people presumed we were an organized initiative. We weren't. It was literally just a well-branded single event. But what happened was that we mobilized, a whole industry that were looking to Creatives for Climate to tell them what to do next. And so a few of us that were part of the organizing kind of committee of the single event started to experiment. So we issued, this is a year later, coming back in Patagonia again, saying like, okay, it's been a year since the first summit. We'd sent 5 different briefs in support of existing initiatives. So my entry point into this movement was also through XR. I read that This Is Not a Drill handbook, and I loved the kind of philosophy and mindset around what it meant to be a change agent in the space. I felt that collaboration was incredibly important. So we actually advocated and drove our whole network to support existing initiatives like Reclaim Fossil Free, supporting an ad ban in Amsterdam, Create and Strike, and others. And so these are some of the assets that some of the agencies at the time had created. This is from Nomads in Amsterdam. And actually, they printed the billboards on their bodies and took them into the protest in The Hague, which was pretty cool. And so just looking back, like how we grow, a few milestones over the years. So we founded through this first event in Amsterdam. We started to grow into a global network through social channels, through connecting with others. In 2021, we launched the Creative Hub, where many of us hang out and spend time and connect today. We also defined our founding principles, which you're going to hear more about, that unite our vision. In 2022, we got some support. Yay, we became an independent nonprofit, and we started launching collective campaigns in support of fossil fuel divestment initiatives. And we launched the Ethical Agency Alliance in 2023, so a way to engage industry and agencies, which you're going to hear more about today. And really proudly, in 2024, we were actually adopted as a recognized accelerator to the UN-backed Race to Zero. And now we're a network in over 90 countries, 5,500 direct members, and 50,000 supporters. So our vision is a just and regenerative future where creativity is used in service to climate solutions. I think many are attracted by this vision. I believe that's why we're growing in numbers. And how we get there is to transition the impact of creativity from driving pollution to scaling solutions. So really quickly, I want to walk you through our 2030 roadmap, which is building the movement of global creative change agents, building capacity of creatives to tackle greenwashing, pioneering a new blueprint beyond do no harm to define what good looks like, and building a new market of opportunities. This in turn creates a groundswell of change agents transforming the impact of creativity from driving pollution to scaling solutions, and it's working. So just last year, we were able to retrain 2,000 professionals. Our Anti-Greenwash Guide reached almost 500,000 with its message. The Ethical Agency Alliance expanded to 7 countries. We mobilized 600 creatives in person across 11 different cities. And yeah, we were adopted into the UN Race to Zero. So it's really exciting. And these are some of the brilliant faces that make Creators for Climate happen in different parts around the world. And I just want to kind of foreshadow that we do have an impact report coming up, releasing early May, so you can learn a little bit more about our impact. But as Tennille shared, it's become crystal clear what needs to happen. The UN Secretary General made a very direct call for in support of a fossil ad ban. He said we must stop mad men fueling the madness. And the good news is that the social tipping point is here. So 89% of the public actually want their governments to do more to tackle the crisis. They just don't know they're the majority yet, which is why coming together is so important. So we want to visualize what we do, the power of coming together.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore. It's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be your first follower. You stand out and you brave.
I think we got the gist. So I want to ask you to share in the chat, have you ever felt like a lone dancer? Or have you ever been a powerful second leader, a supporter, a connector, a mobilizer, and to share how that experience made you feel? Because for me, a lot of stepping into the space has been really scary, really uncomfortable, a lot of learning while doing, and I'd love to hear your experiences too. So just to kind of conclude that we're really interested in pioneering the new future and to painting a vision of what we can do collectively and what creativity can do and be in service of. And what we're at Creators for Climate working to solve is a lack of knowledge on greenwashing and climate communications. Often we were trained in other things. We're brilliant influencers, marketeers, storytellers, but translating and bridging that gap and being able to identify the right briefs may be a work in progress for some. Tradition also mindsets, education and career pathways. We see a lack of diverse leadership within the industry and disruptive voices, and a lack of opportunities and competitive advantage for frontrunners. So we hear that all the time, that our community want to be recognized and rewarded for taking action. So I'm really excited to share more tangible ways to make that happen. So tonight, you're going to hear from my brilliant colleagues leading our efforts to mobilize talent and retrain and upscale to drive industry transformation through our Ethical Agency Alliance, and also to create a new market of opportunities to transition the influence of creativity from driving pollution to scaling solutions. So with that, I will be passing over to one of my brilliant colleagues, Ejia, who is our new program director. And Ejia, take it away.
Hi, thank you, Lucy. Just bear with me for a second as I'm sharing my screen. Okay, can I have a confirmation if you're seeing my screen?
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, amazing, thanks. Hi, everyone. I am Ece, Program Director at Creatives for Climate. I'm based in London, and I'm really excited to be here with you all today and talk about our pathways and opportunities for creative talents. But before I go any further, I want to ask who in the room today identifies as a creative or is already in the creative industry? If you can just like maybe drop an emoji because I can't see the hands at the moment, and that will already give me an idea. Okay, I know some of you already shared what they do. Amazing. So, okay, cool, perfect. I think you're going to like the next couple of slides. And I'm being both sarcastic and serious when I say this, because as you already know, we are living in a climate emergency. It's an emergency driven by a system obsessed with infinite growth on a finite planet. And unfortunately, the creative industry, our industry, has played a role in enabling that system. And yet, I believe, and you probably do too, that this very same industry is full of brilliant and passionate creators and minds, some of them who are, as we can see, are in this room, and creators who have the skills to imagine, design, and mobilize new futures that are regenerative and equitable and thriving. A growing number of those creatives and brilliant minds are already in our collective, and not just creators and creators, but strategists, storytellers, agency leaders, and climate partners and brand change makers. Today, we are a global collective of over 5,500 members, direct members across 90 countries at Creators for Climate, and we are diverse and we are growing. So the question we asked ourselves was, how do we go from a loose community of hundreds to a coordinated global collective of thousands? We, as a small but mighty team, we are the coordinators supporting the collective network to lead the industry impact. So together we drive collective change and wider influence within society through the network. As a collective, we unite behind 5 core principles, and it all starts with making a shared commitment to these values. These are active participation, collaboration, a focus on solutions, so not just what we are fighting against, intersectionality, and finally, divestment from destruction and big polluters, starting with fossil fuel clients. So membership and program starts with signing our shared commitment to these values. And from there, after signing the commitment, members of our collective can plug in as learners, collaborators, and leaders. We have created a program that gives clear pathways for creatives, industries, and brands to engage with mission and values aligned work. It's not a top-down structure, it's distributed, emergent, and flexible. Within the program, we offer both guided and self-led learning opportunities, from our curated learning library to courses like Greenwash Watch. I know a couple of people already mentioned that they have signed up to our upcoming cohort, which is amazing. And communicating climate change to the new ethical agency transition. Our ecosystem supports people at different stages of their journey, basically. And these end-to-end learning modules are designed not just to inform, but also to transform from learner to leader. Our chapter leads pilot last year was a good example of that transformation, where creatives stepped up to host local events and mobilize peers around the world. These events helped to build momentum across our community. Yet if we double down on these decentralized and unique events by creating a targeted creative campaign, we could not only level up our community leadership, but also accelerate our impact to transform the industry. So this chapter leads pilot also helped us understand what distributed leadership could look like, and it laid the foundation for what later became our ambassador program, which I will talk about in just a moment. But before that, let me tell you this. In 2024, when I joined the team to design and audit how we organized, specifically how we created leadership pathways and meaningful entry points for participation, we took that journey from learner to leader very seriously, because we are a leaderful, I hope that's a word, being a leaderful community. And not everyone is at the same stage of their transition journey. So we surveyed 1,500 members to understand their needs and challenges. What we heard was clear. People craved support, community connection. They needed different entry points and practical strategies for balancing ethics and profitability. So we introduced 3-month cohort programs for supporting members. We launched peer-to-peer masterclasses to foster skill sharing. And we partnered with Open Door Climate to provide mentorship opportunities. With these new programs, alongside with our existing initiatives, we've truly built a collective for everyone at every stage of their journey. And that's the beauty of it. Like, the beauty of it is that it creates opportunities for both upskilling and leadership. And so it's also designed so that today's learners can become tomorrow's trainers and experts. It's a continuous cycle of impact, growth, and collaboration and empowerment. I won't go into the details of each program for the sake of our time as much as I would want to, but the way we formalize our ambassador program is actually a great example of how we reimagine this cycle of collaboration. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Yeah, the ambassador program emerged from the growing desire among members to get involved and lead. After a year of piloting our global chapter leads, we saw just how powerful this could be. And as a small team, we also deeply value the impact that skilled community members can make by stepping up and to drive change. So building on that chapter leads program, we formalized a way to do this. And this is the ambassador program. So the program empowers people to take an active and meaningful role within our community and to help grow our movement. And the roles can take different forms, from strategic leadership to community management, content curation, event coordination. And it's a key initiative designed to enable our members to actively shape and advance climate action, basically. And if you zoom just a little bit from that, zoom out just a little bit for a second, look at the bigger picture. Reports show that the knowledge gap on sustainability topics in the creative industry is widening, as we can see on the stats. And knowing the knowledge gap was only widening, this Earth Month, our city lead ambassadors led over 10 events across 8 countries. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Tennille, with the numbers. But they activated over 450 people to bridge the knowledge gap and challenge greenwashing at a local level. And through this powerful series of creative city meetups, and these were in places like London, Milan, Amsterdam, Ljubljana, and a few more cities. We empowered creatives to identify, challenge misleading sustainability claims, helping to mobilize the creative industries for real change. And at these events, we did polls and surveys before and after the events. According to the insights, the confidence level in identifying greenwashing has increased from 5.25 to 7.25 after the workshop. So creatives who have participated increased confidence levels in challenging greenwashing by approximately 20%. And this was just within 90 minutes baseline workshop, which were led by our ambassadors across the globe. So it's the kind of impact our small core team could never have achieved alone, and a real testament to the power of collective action we were able to create. And that's exactly why our collective and programs like the Ambassador Program, which offers scalable and accessible ways for creatives to build knowledge and drive change, are more vital than ever. But it's not just creative talent. It's not just creative talent that has the power to transform the industry. And but working collaboratively with agencies, we can create that catalyst for change. And to show you the pathways forward for agencies, I will hand over to Eva, our growth manager at Creatives for Climate. Thank you so much.
Thank you, AJ. Hi, everyone. So I am Eva, and I'm the Impact and Growth Manager at Creatives for Climate. And I'm excited to be here today, wearing, of course, my obvious favorite color to share the opportunities agencies have to take meaningful climate action. So we've spoken about the knowledge gap on sustainability marketing across the whole industry, but it's also worth noting according to the recent IPA report, 70% of agencies haven't started their journey into sustainability at all. And that's where the Ethical Agency Alliance steps in. In 2023, we established the Alliance, and it has been recognized as a pathway to support agencies in becoming change agents. And the Ethical Agency Alliance thus represents the growing movement of front-running agencies committing their creativity to climate solutions. So the Alliance enables agencies spanning communications, marketing, advertising, and PR sectors, aligning their services as well as client portfolios with a climate-positive future. So these are agencies that are leading the transformation by tackling greenwashing and divesting from fossil fuels, and are also willing to go beyond doing no harm to create a collective vision of what good looks like in our industry. And our theory of transformation focuses on targeting the pioneers, championing and strengthening them to set the pace for the whole industry to follow suit. So while passives continue with business as usual and participants make only incremental changes, pioneers are leading the transformation. So everyone in the Alliance signs the Creatives for Climate commitment that AJ mentioned before, including the pledge to divest from fossil fuel clients, upskills 30% of the staff in anti-greenwash education, and participates in the Ethical Agency Alliance collaboration to collectively share knowledge and also best practice. So here's what these frontrunners are saying, that creativity for good is under threat if we don't distinguish between the ethical agencies and those just putting occasional climate-related work on their website. And also, as a small agency, it's often infuriating and isolating to self-govern by our ethics in a powerful sector that still lags far behind on climate and social justice. So in 2024, we sought to learn more about the opportunities and challenges these independent agencies at the forefront of change were facing. So here's what we learned. Ethical agencies are in fact seeing benefits. 82% of agencies reported attracting higher caliber of talent. 77% of agencies believe brands recognize and reward their ethical behavior. But we need to support ethical agencies who are putting their money where their mouth is. So we asked them to quantify the amount of work they rejected due to ethical concerns, and we learned that 6 million euros was declined due to those concerns, but with real figures actually much higher, because a lot of work was rejected prior to any kind of discussions around the budgets. Meanwhile, major polluters, particularly fossil fuel companies, responsible for 90% of global carbon emissions, continue to expand, threatening our very existence. And the social license they still hold must be revoked urgently. And we know this. We also know that to speed up and get us there, we need a vision of what good looks like, the pathway to get there, the tools to overcome the barriers in our way, and a new market of opportunities to prove the business case for adoption. With that in mind, I'm excited to share 2 new developments within the Alliance that will help drive this transformation forward. The first being the launch of brief matchmaking to drive the business case for taking action. So, to reward frontrunners that are driving change and to drive procurement towards ethical agencies, we are matching them with mission-aligned organizations and brands, such as the most recent match made between LEAP Agency and Drawdown Lab, one of the world's leading resources for climate solutions. And mission-aligned organizations are increasingly recognizing the benefits of working with agencies that are not posing any risk to their reputation and brand. This is why we are building on this momentum. We'll be validating the concept of service emissions, using it to drive greater accountability, create competitive advantage, and also set new ethical standards across the whole creative industries. So to support this, we'll be guiding agencies in embedding service emissions, building on the 6 key action areas, the framework that was launched by Race to Zero. And now I'm so pleased to welcome Valerie Salas, Service Emissions Program Officer at Oxford Net Zero, who will share insights into their inspiring work on service emissions and also why it is time to move beyond focusing solely on operational emissions towards the future where service providers also take responsibility for the emissions they enable.
Thank you so much for the invitation and also for the opportunity to share some of our latest research topics about service emissions. So first, for those who don't know, we are part of the Oxford Net Zero Initiative, which is a group here at Oxford University of different academics and researchers that are actually trying to drive the conversation regarding how we as a community, but also as the broader economy, are going to get to net zero. So in that context, of course, we research different pathways, but also we are researching on different questions from solutions, but also from implications. And in the part of implications of what this net zero transition is and how we can get there, we have found this point of service emissions as key and important to actually decarbonize all our economy, especially in the context that we are running out of time. And of course, there are different regulatory pressures, but also catalysts from the same industry that want to act on climate. And they're actually finding, they're struggling to find like how we can actually do business on the right side of history. With that framework, when we're talking about service emissions, we are talking about the emissions that service providers are generating to the work they are delivering with clients. And this is a term that is not only applied to agencies, but it also applies for different service providers, such as, for example, legal services, we have consultant services, we have engineering services, architecture services, and so on. So while they have this kind of definition in common because all of them are serving clients, and that there's an impact that comes from that service because they have an influence and they, as you have mentioned, they have like the capacity and the catalyst change of generating a change even in behaviors, but also in consumers, but also on how projects are going to impact our planet and our economy. They are all different in their own way, on the way the project is going to be managed, but also in the way the project is going to be accountable for the emissions that that project is going to generate for the client. So that's why we, for each of the different service emissions types, we have different approaches, but we are also different discussions. In the case of advertising and public relationships, we can see that not only it is important to understand how my agency it's on scope 1 and scope 2 in emissions, which is the common conversations that we currently have, but also how the service emissions are embedded in the scope 3 of agencies. So how is like this concept of service emissions embedded in scope 3? Well, so when we go through the different standards such as SBTi or GHG, we can understand that for manufacturers or producers, the scope 3 mentions the use of goods, which is part of the scope 3 emissions, but there's very little say, or you can find some references, but it's not specifically mentioned what is the case with service providers? So usually it is thought that they are not considered, or there is no reference to them, when it should, because the fact that you are not producing something but you are giving a service is basically the same logic that you should be accountable for that. So in that case, what we are currently researching, and we are also supporting and giving advice, is on how civil society and also from academia we can actually give inputs to these standards to be very specific and put it explicit that when we are talking about the impact of service providers, we're talking about the service emissions that they should be considering in the scope 3 of their emissions. So that's currently like kind of the work we are doing right now, like looking at the standards, looking at the best practice that is in the industry, looking at any current clients or engagements that are going on to identify how they are measuring their impact on the service, but also what are the best practices to actually share them with the broader community. And this is why we also support these kind of webinars in order to socialize these terms, but also to support the people who are actually coming together and the communities that are coming together to actually talk about these discussions, but also talk about these terms that sometimes are so complicated and are difficult to come down, but are important to actually drive the way we want to change in order to get to net zero.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Valerie, for sharing that. So for folks who haven't potentially heard of serviced emissions previously, we will be actually holding a webinar later this year that will focus specifically on the concept of serviced emissions. So it was just a taster for today. But to look at where we're going and kind of direct our vision towards a vision of 2030, I'm going to hand over to you, Lucy, to share a little bit about changes happening and kick off into our panel.
Fabulous. Thanks, Tennille. And I will ask you to lead on the slides to introduce our brilliant panel. But I'm so incredibly proud of our collective efforts. So much of this is voluntary and free for ways for creatives and agencies to get involved. So thank you so much to everyone so far. And I'm excited to turn our attention to some leading voices within the space. So first of all, I'd like to welcome Harriet Kingerby, co-founder of the Conscious Advertising Network, into the room. Harriet, I would invite you to share a little bit about your work and your vision for transformation towards 2030 to kick us off.
Thanks, Lucy, and hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. And I think one of the questions earlier on was about what inspires you. And I think what really inspires me about this community is understanding like how deeply people are thinking about some of the issues that really face not only our industry, but also, you know, the potential of our industry to really create the change that we need to see. 2030 is not a long way away. Like 5 years ago, we were all getting, I think this time 5 years ago, we were getting kind of, locked down for COVID in the UK. And it was, and if we think about how far we've come since then, it's a long time, but it's not. And so what I tried to think about for this introduction was actually, kind of what do we need over the next 5 years to get us on a course for not only our industry being in a space where we can really be in the problem-solving space rather than part of the problem, but also for us as individuals. And I think the first thing that we really, really need is vision. So, what you've set out here today is actually a series of kind of really visionary projects about how the industry changes itself. So, for example, Oxford Net Zero, and the serviced emissions work, well, we can really clearly see that actually we need to take responsibility as an industry for the emissions that we cause. We can't just say, oh, it's all down to our clients. In fact, we need to be making sure that we are thinking about these, the emissions of our work from, kind of cradle to grave. Number one. Number two, we have a massive problem in the climate space in that what the United Nations call the information integrity around climate is actually really poor. Now, for those of us who kind of don't speak in these lofty terms, what that means is in our information spaces, there is a whole lot of misinformative information. There is a lot of lies. There is a lot of what we call climate denial going on about climate change, that kind of really counters this idea that it's us, we need to act on it, and we need to do it now. And as we talked about the role of advertising in being able to shift categories, to shift mindsets, to really kind of harness our skills as the architects of desire to really drive that sustainable change. So really, we need to be thinking about actually how can we contribute to making sure that there's better information out there. Now, that can be through the content that we create, the clients that we work with, the new business we go after. I think it's the net zero economy in the UK grew something like 10%, 9%, I think, more than business as usual over the last kind of few years. So, and also those of us, I know we're all creatives here today, but those of you that work on the media side of things as well, in fact, many of our clients, even if they're ethical brands, some of them have climate kind of keywords on their block lists, which means that we're disincentivizing journalists from producing really great climate content as well. So, there's loads that we can do about that. I'll pop a link because that is super complicated, but like thinking about how we make sure that the information environment around this is better. Then I think we need to, there's a big emphasis on ideas, but in fact, there's some great movements out there that could really benefit from all of us joining them. So we've heard some great stuff today. We've heard about the kind of, the subvertising work that can really kind of, I think, take issues and really put a point on them, put humor on them. We've heard about, the kind of the Oxford Net Zero work, all of this stuff. What can we join? And then also, I think that the last thing is, how do we bring new people along with us? So quite a few of you, I think, in the chat were talking about, well, look, I'm in an organization, I'm the lone dancer, like, kind of how do we do this? Well, I think not as communicators, sometimes we need to think about how we express things in a way that's accessible for people. With the work that I did a few years ago at Climate Labs, we looked at kind of thinking about people as persuadable. So all of us are, there's a small section of us that get up every morning and think about climate change, and we're growing, and that is awesome, and we're motivated, and a lot of us are on this call today. But there are a large section of people for whom actually climate change is less, is less important. Obviously they've got things, people have got things to do. You've got your kids, you've got other things that are more important to you, whether that's place or people or, kind of animals or whatever. And it's about finding those points of connection, finding where people are persuadable and how people are persuadable and bringing them with you. And I think that that's something we as communicators, we intrinsically know how to do. Like, we know how to make people think that, kind of sugar water is associated with the American dream. So therefore, we've got this. And I think really leaning into that challenge is great. And finally, we also need, as well as visions, I think we need to stay motivated. It's not just hope, it's hope with a practical plan that we're all aiming for as a movement. So for me, I would say, just connecting with your community like this is a great start. For those of you who are facing challenges and barriers, please do, I think, ask questions and pop them in the chat, and we can do our best in our experience to to help you potentially think about some of that. I mean, I certainly have had a very wiggly career path, and that's ended up being, founder of some organizations, advisor to Creators for Climate and a few others. So we can do our best to try and tackle some of those in the answers.
Thank you so much for that, Harry. I know you do such important work on information integrity, and really important to bring that into it. And I also love your call to join something. I think particularly this is an industry that is a bit guilty of being at the pointy end of competition and individualism. That is kind of like, we're at the pointy end of capitalism. So from a behavior change point of view, I think it can be really powerful to stand along with others. And I hope that if anything, people can walk away having joined something, found somebody. Speaking of connection, I'm excited to speak to our next thought leader, Freya Newman, who we're honoured to have here today from Global Optimism. Freya, we'd love to hear a bit more about your 2030 vision and why, within the current landscape, we need to build a movement of movements.
Thank you so much, Lucy. And thanks so much for having me. And speaking of wiggly career paths, whenever I join these community gatherings, I always feel like I want to completely retrain and change what I do and become a creative and like untap that inside me. But I currently work on a project called Groundswell at Global Optimism, which is basically an unbranded effort to try and change our story and our narrative on climate away from one of doom and despair to one of possibility. And it's very much founded in the belief that a sense of possibility and hope and optimism is what will drive us towards achieving our climate goals. But unfortunately, right now, as we've kind of covered in parts of this call, a very doomist and increasingly politicized narrative on climate is winning. And this is obviously what dominates the headlines. It's what leads us to doom scrolling between worsening climate impacts, companies pulling back on their commitments, rising nationalism. All these different headlines just lead to a sense of apathy, a feeling of hopelessness, which just leads to this cycle of inaction and despair. Meanwhile, our smart opponents and those with vested interests have built quite a powerful coordinated narrative infrastructure that's winning over public opinion. And so against all of these different headwinds, I think the need for everybody to come together and build this movement of movements is very much greater than ever. And so what I work on, I've been working with lots of partners from across the climate space, including Creators for Climate and many others, on a collective campaign called Mission 2025. And I know this meeting is called Mission 2030, and we're kind of exploring our 2030 vision. But Mission 2025 aims to try and tip the balance on climate progress this year to get us back on track to achieving our 2030 goals. And so the campaign really puts a lot of effort into uplifting this story of possibility that's very much grounded in the data and the science that shows how a new economy is actually rising. And it's a new economy that's more advanced, it's better for people, it's more efficient, it's more resilient, being driven by this insane rise in solar and wind and batteries and technologies that we're seeing all across the world. And so we're just basically trying to do a better job at telling this story to drive more ambitious action. And we need everybody to be a part of this, whether it's businesses and financial institutions in the boardrooms, whether it's governments and subnational governments in the cabinet rooms, or whether it's creatives and cultural leaders and everyday people in the living rooms. We really need all of these different groups to be part of the same movement if we really want to make change in the second half of this critical decade.
We don't have that much time. Thank you so much, Freya. And yeah, I mean, our kind of secret Trojan horse entry point at Creators Climate is that we need more creativity. You do not need to be identifying as a creative. And so it's funny, I often get that people are like, but like, what is your creative credential? And so you are welcome here. And we all need to be more creative. I wish that we had more policymakers and lawyers and ambitions and political leaders that were here with us embracing their creativity too. So moving to the super creative, Robbie, you've already talked us through a history of rebellion and activism in advertising. I'd like to hear more about the key obstacles you see in reimagining advertising as a force for good. How do you see organizations being able to use traditional forms of advertising to drive systemic change?
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Yeah, it's a really great question, and by that I mean the answer is very difficult. But yeah, like to try and grapple with it, I think there is a systemic conundrum, economic conundrum built into the advertising industry as it stands, which is that it has traditionally been about shifting units of product, and with relatively little regard to what those products are and what their impacts they will have on the environment. And there's lots of good things that get advertised that are perfectly harmless, but there's a growing amount and a increasing volume of under our consumerism model of products which are just like trashing the world and our health with it. And so as we look towards a transition to a circular economy, the economic conundrum that we need to identify is that there isn't going to be the same amount of money available for all the bad stuff that gets advertised to just shift over to the good stuff. There is going to need to be a reduction in that and done in a just and fair way that recognizes the need to bring up some people's living standards to have equality in the world, but not just like everyone going up to a level of super consumption of the wealthy elites. You know, can't all have 3 SUVs and a private jet, right? So to try and stay on track with the question, that is a major conundrum, like the economics of it. And I know for creatives, the more we can begin to just grapple with the economics of our current system, then hopefully the sooner we'll think our way out of it and organize our way and imagine different ways of organizing our economy, as well as achieving like the social goals that we want from our economy, like rising living standards, equality, social connection, clean air, etc., etc. So that's maybe a bit theoretical, but within our industries and within our agencies, in terms of using advertising techniques or traditional approaches to advertising for systemic change, I think what's key in that, I mean, advertising is just really good communication, and loads of great political campaigns are being used, good communication. And that's the reason I started with the economics there, is that all my friends that work in advertising say, I just really want to work on social causes and for charities and for NGOs. But what the execs will say, of course, is, well, where's the money to fund that? Sorry, and that's done this back to front, but that's why I started on the economics. However, if we are working on campaigns for systemic change, I think it's important to recognize the limits of individual choice and to be really clear about the political model of like consumer democracy, and just that we've had sort of 20 to 30 years of government saying to us, well, if we want sustainable, or if you want a living planet, then people should buy the right products and choose with their wallet and create market signals to encourage the market. And that's just not going to work, because there are systemic reasons why we're in a polluting mess. And for some things, like there's a proposed new oil field in Rosebank in the North Sea being proposed, right? We as consumers cannot choose to buy a product that is going to like stop that from happening. Like, even if we buy less from Equinor, or we just don't have that structural power as individual consumers. So we just need to move beyond that individualist paradigm that consumerism sometimes sets up for us. And so, as well as working on NGO campaigns, if we can, or pro-social, pro-environmental campaigns, we also need to be advocating for government regulation, because as one of the slides from an earlier presentation said, agencies that stick their head above the parapet and do the ethical thing might find themselves at a disadvantage by a regulatory field that might give an advantage to a competitor. So whether that's putting pressure on, say, the advertising regulator in your country, such as the ASA in the UK, or others, or directly interacting with government and calling not just for more self-regulation for the industry, but for government to regulate, to create a level playing field for our health and for the planet. Those are the kind of big levers we're going to need to pull as an industry and as creatives, and just get beyond this, like, we're just going to make green ads, because that's not going to get us to the place we need to get to at the speed that we need to get to it at.
If I remember, thank you so much, Robbie. If I remember correctly, the Extinction Rebellion letter also said, like, no, your pro bono campaign for plastic straws is not going to cut it. And I think what you're raising is actually like a very common conversation that is entering the mainstreams, is essentially like the limits of green capitalism. And I think that is something that, obviously, if it was more profitable to do the right thing, more people would be doing the right thing. But I think also, as Harriet already indicated, we are seeing a rise in the net zero economy. So I think it's kind of like all playing these different roles, and outside insiders, I can see a response. Robbie, go for it.
Yeah, and I just, whilst trying to critique the limits of individual consumer choice there, I also don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like, making individual choice is important because it invests us in future alternatives, and it creates a moral case, and it creates a social contagion that this is what we should do. But we should just And if we scale it up, of course, to millions and billions of people, of course that would work. But we should just recognize the slowness of that and recognize the limitations and the other structural things around consumer choice, such as, you know, the lack of taxation on aviation fuel is why it's so cheap to fly, for example. And that's not about choosing the train over the plane. That's a structural thing that needs to be resolved at a policy level, not just with more consumer choice, for example.
This has reflected the ongoing dilemma in my brain every day of like systemic, individual. So welcome everybody to the insides of navigating this. We have an audience question, and I'll throw it out there to any of our panelists to respond. Do you have any advice for new grads who feel they have no influence in their turbulent careers, but still want to make waves towards climate action?
I'm happy to kick off with that one. I think start somewhere is probably one of my biggest pieces of advice, because I think this is an overwhelming place to want. Not only is the creative industries overwhelming in terms of I don't know, the amount of work you're asked to do, how difficult it is to get jobs at the moment, you know, kind of like navigating office politics, all of these things are overwhelming things. And I think starting somewhere, finding, you know, even if you don't get the dream job with the dream agency, with the dream briefs, think about what, you know, kind of what is in your power to do. And if that is, for example, there's a great initiative called Change the Brief. And that is encouraging agencies who get briefs that they feel are unsustainable or could be more sustainable to, like, you know, to reverse brief their clients and say, hey, you know, here's 2 ideas that answer your brief. Here's another idea that's even better, and do things like that. And I think, you know, kind of looking for those ways that you can influence. I think one thing that I wish more new grads knew was that, you know, I hate to say it, but like a lot of industries, a lot of agencies are full of people who are really, really like, they're not in touch with the things you're in touch with. They don't know the things you know. And our industry is obsessed with, you know, it's obsessed with new consumers. It's obsessed with youth and trying to reach people. So you actually have, people will listen to you. You have more, your what you think, what you feel, your insights into new platforms, you know, kind of younger consumers, etc., are really, really valuable, and people will listen to you. So yeah, I think someone's paraphrased this beautifully. Focus on what you can control, focus on what you can change, and try to be nice to yourself if you don't do all the things that you want to do as quickly as you want to do them, because you're talking to someone who spent 3 years in accreditation of energy efficient appliances before I realized that creativity was my thing. So, you know, start somewhere.
I love that. Thank you, Harriet. And we've got so many amazing questions coming in. I'm going to choose one of the trickier ones just to take us on a different tangent. And I will leave it up to a hot potato approach as to who wants to respond. In this age of xenophobia, not just fear and hatred of others, but especially against green politics and climate scientists, how do creatives tackle that challenge in what looks like to be a very challenging decade all over the world, but especially in the global north? What is effective climate communications in terms of driving change? Leave that one. I think it's worth noticing and acknowledging like what we're up against in the climate. So I wanted to give space to that.
I can go again very quickly, and I will be quick so that my other panelists have a chance to speak. But like, this is why I think this persuadables framing is really useful, because what we have to do, we are up against information ecosystems which feed us polarizing content to keep us, you know, to keep us on platforms. We are up against politicians who harness, you know, kind of dynamics to pit us against each other, culture wars and conspiracy theories, and tell us that it's someone else's fault when it's their fault, all of those things. And I think what we need to do is find frames that appeal to lots of people, find language which is neutral, and people understand, you know, and really, I think, start where people are. Sometimes there's, you know, I think there's as campaigners, often we start with the issue and we start talking about the issue because we care so deeply about it, and we think, if I can just tell you enough about this, I can make you care. As marketers, we start with our audience and we go, what do they, you know, how do they connect with this issue? You know, we would do the same thing for a chocolate bar as we would, or toothpaste, as we possibly should with climate. How does this issue solve a problem for somebody? How does it speak to something people already care about? Is that the cleanliness of their local area? Is that their family? Is that their sense of you know, pride in place? And start there. And I think if we start to do that, we can start to actually kind of create trust across groups. We can create common language, which we all understand, and we can create campaigns that bring us together as opposed to pit us against each other. Because I agree, like we need more stuff that brings us together and less stuff that drives us apart.
I love that, Harriet. And I think these questions reflect, you know, there's the behavior change conversation. So how as an industry can we kind of clean up our influence? And then there's also the persuasive, mobilizing powers of creativity, and they both have a role going forward. I wanted to ask Freya and Robbie one final question, which I hope and I think might reflect and resonate with those in the room that may be joining for the first time or maybe in the movement for a while. I just want to ask you what personally is giving you hope and what you want your 2030 to look like.
I hope you don't mind if I go first. I just wanted to build on Harriet's last answer as well. And it's kind of the same thing that is giving me hope. But just building on everything Harriet was saying was really resonating, because I think the messages, the messengers, and the channels we use are so important, particularly to engage kind of like everyday people and living room audiences. We really need to connect into the cares of ordinary people. And I think it's 89% of people care about climate change and want to see more action on climate change, but don't realize that we're actually the global majority. And I think that's where culture, communications, and the role of the creatives in this room comes in. Because again, to everything Harriet was saying, the climate movement often forgets to talk like a human, whereas culture and creatives can reach people in a whole new way, in a human way that's fun and exciting and connecting to what we care about. And a messaging frame that we often use with our campaigns that's been tested and proven to work the best is protect what we love. So how can we build a story on climate that's about protecting the people we love, the places we love? And I think by doing that, I think this is really the space where we're going to see a mindset shift and begin to normalize support for climate action. And kind of seeing this play out, there are definitely bright spots where this is already happening. And I think that's what gives me hope. So I kind of answered the last question, but wrapped it into maybe your next question slightly. Although I didn't talk about my vision for 2030, but
I think it's a beautiful protect.
Robbie can take that one.
And resonating. Robbie, some final words from you. Be honest.
Yeah, it is a challenge, staying hopeful in dismal times, and it does feel at the moment of that we are on, you know, a down cycle for the climate movement, but it's, you know, there is social movement theory that shows that, you know, movements go in cycles, and they have their peaks, and the last big peak was probably in 2019, and that maintained for a good few years, certainly in the UK, and we're now on a downward trend. But that also means that we can pick up again, and just sort of stepping back and trying to take that long view can help. And that's easier said than done. Giving into despair is a surefire way to not succeed. Some other little bits I take courage from is to celebrate your wins. It's really important, any small wins, and they always feel like they're not enough. You know, so we stopped Ad Free City's got a Total advert banned a couple of weeks ago, you know, and he's like, we celebrate it, because even though we know it's a drop in the ocean of the greenwash that's happening, we're like, well, we'll take that win and we'll build on it. But the thing that I take hope from is, despite this, we're at the down cycle moment that we're in for the climate movement, people love nature, and they love their access to green spaces, and that really came out during COVID, and that is a fundamental connection to the earth that we can build on, and isn't going to shift. And so I just take heart from that, that we can build on people's love for nature, love for the environment, and get through this current tricky spot that we're in, and build something winning.
Love that, Robbie. And it's true. Some of the worst polluters have the biggest love for nature. It always blows my mind how that connection isn't always made in the everyday behavior and choices. But that was really inspiring. We have so many questions that are coming through. So we've designed the free hub as a space where you can kind of ask those questions, and we'll jump in to support you. Thank you so much for being here, and to our brilliant and inspiring leaders across the movement, Freya, Robbie, Harriet, and Valerie. I'm gonna pass it now to Tennille to talk about more ways that you can get involved with Creators Climate. And before we do, thank Tennille, Edja, and Ava from myself for all this incredibly hard work to create all of these amazing pathways to drive change. So over to you, Tennille.
Thank you so much, Lucy, and thank you everyone who has spoken today. And I mean, we've already touched on this, and we've heard a bit from Antonio Guterres a few times today, but I like this quote to kind of end on, just to remind us that like creativity is like, I wish I could swear here, but it is like an amazing thing that we all have. And, you know, you don't have to be a creative to be creative. So yeah, we shouldn't give up fighting for that planet. As Robbie mentioned, like we all share this love for nature. So if you were inspired today, like when you're going home tonight, you know, getting ready to cook your dinner, or whether you're going out to see friends after tonight's webinar, remember that it does take courage to step into a leadership position. You know, it always makes you feel nervous when you're doing something you've never done. And there's a quote from Brené Brown that I absolutely love, that it's like, of course you're going to feel nervous when it's you're doing something for the first time. So remember, it takes courage to do something new. But we do need people in everyday roles across like every profession to kind of step up and take a role, to take action within the industry, and also bring others along with them. So yeah, step up and be that first person dancing. I'm sure someone will join you. So if you are an individual, an entrepreneur, freelancer, or an employee, I advise you to join our Creative Climate Hub. It's free. Or if you're looking for pathways to lead, check out our Lead on Climate membership. If you are an agency, I highly recommend looking into joining the Ethical Agency Alliance and joining our group of pioneers who are actively transforming the industry. And if you're a brand or a business, commit your procurement or commit to working with creatives who are actively transforming the industry. Because only by doing all of these things together can we actively transform this huge mission that we have. I'll share a link in the chat which goes to all of those options for you to share. And of course, we've spoken a little bit about greenwashing today, and also across Earth Month. And I think, you know, we can all upskill and, you know, challenge our skills to tackle greenwashing across the industry. So look into taking the Greenwash Watch, which we also have a upcoming cohort starting in May. But to end today, I just really want to say a big thank you for coming along and spending the last 90 minutes or so with us, and a big thank you to all of the questions, all of the engagement, and yeah, just taking part in today, because this movement wouldn't be here without your involvement. So a big thank you, and have a good rest of your evening.